In this video, I will read to you the Aquatic Ape Hypothesis Wikipedia page as of September 2020. We will go through the history, the Hardy-Morgan hypothesis, reactions, critiques, the reactions of Hardy and Morgan, wading and bipedalism, their diet, diving behavior and performance, and lastly, Vernix Quesosa.
If you like what you're here and see, please help our channel grow by subscribing and joining our Patreon. Links in the description.
The Aquatic Ape Hypothesis, AAH, also referred to as Aquatic Ape Theory, AAT, is the idea that ancestors of modern humans were more aquatic than those of other great apes. The hypothesis was initially proposed by the marine biologist Alister Hardy in 1960, who argued that a branch of apes was forced by competition over terrestrial habitats to hunt for food such as shellfish on the seashore and seabed, leading to adaptations that explain distinctive characteristics of modern humans, such as functional hairlessness and bipedalism. Elaine Morgan's 1990 book on the hypothesis, Scars of Evolution, received some favorable reviews but was subject to criticism from the anthropologist John Langdon in 1997, who characterized it as an umbrella hypothesis with inconsistencies that were unresolved and acclaimed the parsimony that was false. The hypothesis has been deprecated as pseudoscience. The hypothesis is thought to be more popular with the lay public than with scientists. In the scientific literature, it is generally ignored by anthropologists.
History: Aquatic Ape Hypothesis.
In 1942, the German pathologist Max Westenhofer, 1871–1957, discussed various human characteristics: hairlessness, subcutaneous fat, the regression of the olfactory organ, webbed fingers, direction of the body hair, etc., that could have derived from an aquatic past, quoting several other authors who had made similar speculations. As he did not believe human beings were apes, he believed this might have been during the Cretaceous, contrary to what is possible given the geologic and evolutionary biology evidence available at the time. He stated, "The postulation of an aquatic mode of life during an early stage of human evolution is a tenable hypothesis, for which further inquiry may produce additional supporting evidence." He later abandoned the concept. Independently of Westenhofer's writings, the marine biologist Alister Hardy had since 1930 also hypothesized that humans may have had ancestors more aquatic than previously imagined, although his work, unlike Westenhofer's, was rooted in the Darwinian consensus. On the advice of his colleagues, Hardy delayed presenting the hypothesis for approximately 30 years. After he had become a respected academic and knighted for contributions to marine biology, Hardy finally voiced his thoughts in a speech to the British Sub-Aqua Club in Brighton on March 5, 1960. Several national newspapers reported sensational presentations of Hardy's ideas, which he countered by explaining them more fully in an article in New Scientist on March 17, 1960. "My thesis is that a branch of this primitive ape stock was forced by competition from life in the trees to feed on the seashores and to hunt for food, shellfish, sea urchins, etc., in the shallow waters off the coast." The idea was generally ignored by the scientific community after the article was published. Some interest was received, notably from the geographer Carl Sauer, whose views on the role of the seashore in human evolution stimulated tremendous progress in the study of coastal and aquatic adaptations inside marine archaeology. In 1967, the hypothesis was mentioned in The Naked Ape, a popular book by the zoologist Desmond Morris, who reduced Hardy's phrase "more aquatic ape-like ancestors" to the bare aquatic ape, commenting that despite its most appealing indirect evidence, the aquatic theory lacks solid support. While traditional descriptions of savage existence identified three common sources of sustenance: gathering of fruit and nuts, fishing, and hunting, in the 1950s, the anthropologist Raymond Dart focused on hunting and gathering as the likely organizing concept of human society in prehistory, and hunting was the focus of the screenwriter Robert Ardrey's 1961 bestseller African Genesis. Another screenwriter, Elaine Morgan, responded to this focus in her 1972 Descent of Woman, which parodied the conventional picture of the Tarzan-like figure of the prehominid who came down from the trees, saw a grassland teeming with game, picked up a weapon and became a mighty hunter, and pictured a more peaceful scene of humans by the seashore. She took her lead from a section in Morris's 1967 book which referred to the possibility of an aquatic ape period in evolution, his name for the speculation by the biologist Alister Hardy in 1960. When it aroused no reaction in the academic community, she dropped the feminist criticism and wrote a series of books: The Aquatic Ape, 1982, The Scars of Evolution, 1990, The Descent of the Child, 1994, The Aquatic Ape Hypothesis, 1997, and The Naked Darwinist, 2008, which explored the issues in more detail. Books published on the topic since then have avoided the contentious term aquatic and used waterside instead.
The Hardy-Morgan hypothesis.
Hardy's hypothesis as outlined in The New Scientist was: my thesis is that a branch of this primitive ape stock was forced by competition from life in the trees to feed on the seashores, and to hunt for food, shellfish, sea urchins etc., in the shallow waters off the coast. I suppose that they were forced into the water just as we have seen happen in so many other groups of terrestrial animals. I am imagining this happening in the warmer parts of the world, in the tropical seas where man could stand being in the water for relatively long periods, that is, several hours at a stretch. Hardy argued a number of features of modern humans are characteristic of aquatic adaptations. He pointed to humans' lack of body hair as being analogous to the same lack seen in whales and hippopotamuses, and noted the layer of subcutaneous fat humans have that Hardy believed other apes lacked, although it has been shown that captive apes with ample access to food have levels of subcutaneous fat similar to humans. Additional features cited by Hardy include the location of the trachea in the throat rather than the nasal cavity, the human propensity for front-facing copulation, tears and eccrine sweating, though these claimed pieces of evidence have alternative evolutionary adaptationist explanations that do not invoke an aquatic context. Hardy additionally posited that bipedalism evolved first as an aid to wading before becoming the usual means of human locomotion, and tool use evolved out of the use of rocks to crack open shellfish. These last arguments were cited by later proponents of AWE as an inspiration for their research programs. Morgan summed up her take on the hypothesis in 2011. Waterside hypotheses of human evolution assert that selection from wading, swimming and diving and procurement of food from aquatic habitats have significantly affected the evolution of the lineage leading to Homo sapiens as distinct from that leading to Pan.
Reactions.
The AAH is generally ignored by anthropologists, although it has a following outside academia, and has received celebrity endorsement, for example from David Attenborough. Academics who have commented on the aquatic ape hypothesis include categorical opponents, generally members of the community of academic anthropology, who reject almost all of the claims related to the hypothesis. Other academics have argued that the rejection of Hardy and Morgan is partially unfair given that other explanations which suffer from similar problems are not so strongly opposed. A conference devoted to the subject was held at Valkenburg, Netherlands in 1987. Its 22 participants included academic proponents and opponents of the hypothesis and several neutral observers headed by the anthropologist Vernon Reynolds of Oxford University. His summary at the end was, overall, it will be clear that I do not think it would be correct to designate our early hominid ancestors as aquatic. But at the same time there does seem to be evidence that not only did they take to water from time to time but that the water, and by this I mean inland lakes and rivers, was a habitat that provided enough extra food to count as an agency for selection.
Critiques.
The AAH is not accepted as empirically supported by the scholarly community, and has been met with significant skepticism. The Nature editor and paleontologist Henry G. has argued that the hypothesis has equivalent merit to creationism, and should be similarly dismissed. In a 1997 critique, anthropologist John Langdon considered the aquatic ape hypothesis under the heading of an umbrella hypothesis, and argued that the difficulty of ever disproving such a thing meant that although the idea has the appearance of being a parsimonious explanation, it actually was no more powerful an explanation than the null hypothesis that human evolution is not particularly guided by interaction with bodies of water. Langdon argued that however popular the idea was with the public, the umbrella nature of the idea means that it cannot serve as a proper scientific hypothesis. Langdon also objected to Morgan's blanket opposition to the savanna hypothesis, which he took to be the collective discipline of paleoanthropology. He observed that some anthropologists had regarded the idea as not worth the trouble of a rebuttal. In addition, the evidence cited by AAH proponents mostly concerned developments in soft tissue anatomy and physiology, whilst paleoanthropologists rarely speculated on evolutionary development of anatomy beyond the musculoskeletal system and brain size, as revealed in fossils. After a brief description of the issues under 26 different headings, he produced a summary critique of these with mainly negative judgments. His main conclusion was that the AAH was unlikely ever to be disproved on the basis of comparative anatomy, and that the one body of data that could potentially disprove it was the fossil record. Anthropologist John D. Hawkes wrote that it is fair to categorize the AAH as pseudoscience because of the social factors that inform it, particularly the personality-led nature of the hypothesis, and the unscientific approach of its adherents. physical anthropologist Eugenie Scott has described the aquatic ape hypothesis as an instance of crank anthropology akin to other pseudoscientific ideas in anthropology such as alien-human interbreeding and Bigfoot. In The Accidental Species, Misunderstandings of Human Evolution, 2013, Henry G. remarked on how a seafood diet can aid in the development of the human brain. He, nevertheless, criticized the AAH because it's always a problem identifying features, such as body fat and hairlessness, that humans have now and inferring that they must have had some adaptive value in the past. Also, it's notoriously hard to infer habits, such as swimming, from anatomical structures. Popular support for the AAH has become an embarrassment to some anthropologists, who want to explore the effects of water on human evolution without engaging with the AAH, which they consider emphasizes adaptations to deep water, or at least underwater, conditions. Foley and Marr suggest that to flirt with anything watery in paleoanthropology can be misinterpreted, but argue. There is little doubt that throughout our evolution we have made extensive use of terrestrial habitats adjacent to freshwater, since we are, like many other terrestrial mammals, a heavily water-dependent species. But they allege that under pressure from the mainstream, AAH supporters tended to flee from the core arguments of Hardy and Morgan towards a more generalized emphasis on fishy things. In The Waterside Ape, a pair of 2016 BBC radio documentaries, David Attenborough discussed what he thought was a move towards mainstream acceptance for the aquatic ape hypothesis in the light of new research findings. He interviewed scientists supportive of the idea, including Kathleen Stewart and Michael Crawford, who had published papers in a special issue of the Journal of Human Evolution on the role of freshwater and marine resources in the evolution of the human diet, brain and behavior. Responding to the documentaries in a newspaper article, paleoanthropologist Alice Roberts criticized Attenborough's promotion of aquatic ape hypothesis, and dismissed the idea as a distraction from the emerging story of human evolution that is more interesting and complex. She argued that the aquatic ape hypothesis had become a theory of everything that is simultaneously too extravagant and too simple. Philosopher Daniel Dennett, in his discussion of evolutionary philosophy, commented during the last few years, when I have found myself in the company of distinguished biologists, evolutionary theorists, paleoanthropologists, and other experts, I have often asked them to tell me, please, exactly why Elaine Morgan must be wrong about the aquatic theory. I haven't yet had a reply worth mentioning, aside from those who admit, with a twinkle in their eyes, that they have also wondered the same thing. He challenged both Elaine Morgan and the scientific establishment in that both sides are indulging in adaptationist just-so stories. Along the same lines, historian Erica Lorraine Milam noted that independent of Morgan's work, certain standard explanations of human development in paleoanthropology have been roundly criticized for lacking evidence, while being based on sexist assumptions. Anatomy lecturer Bruce Charlton gave Morgan's book Scars of Evolution an enthusiastic review in the British Medical Journal in 1991, calling it exceptionally well written and a good piece of science. In 1995, paleoanthropologist Philip Tobias declared that the savanna hypothesis was dead, because the open conditions did not exist when humanity's precursors stood upright, and that therefore, the conclusions of the Valkenburg Conference were no longer valid. Tobias praised Morgan's book Scars of Evolution as a remarkable book, though he said that he did not agree with all of it. Tobias and his student further criticized the orthodox hypothesis by arguing that the coming out of the forest of man's precursors had been an unexamined assumption of evolution, since the days of Lamarck, and followed by Darwin, Wallace, and Haeckel, well before Raymond Dart used it.
Reactions of Hardy and Morgan.
Alistair Hardy was astonished and mortified in 1960 when the national Sunday papers carried banner headlines, "Oxford professor says man a sea ape," causing problems with his Oxford colleagues. As he later said to his ex-pupil Desmond Morris, "Of course I then had to write an article to refute this, saying no, this is just a guess, a rough hypothesis, this isn't a proven fact. And of course, we're not related to dolphins." Elaine Morgan's 1972 book Descent of Woman became an international bestseller, a Book of the Month selection in the United States, and was translated into 10 languages. The book was praised for its feminism, but paleoanthropologists were disappointed with its promotions of the AAH. Morgan removed the feminist critique and left her AAH ideas intact, publishing the book as The Aquatic Ape 10 years later, but it did not garner any more positive reaction from scientists.
Related academic and independent research.
Although the general reaction to Hardy and Morgan's proposals was silenced by the relevant academic community, there have been over the last decade some academics who were inspired by AAH proposals, even to the point of pursuing particular lines of research on its basis. Some of the academics and professional scientists who have supported the AAH include Michael Crawford, professor and director of the Institute of Brain Chemistry and Human Nutrition, at Imperial College London. His former postdoctoral researcher, Stephen Cunnin, now professor of medicine at Université de Sherbrooke, Erika Shagate, professor of environmental physiology at Mid-Sweden University, Kathleen M. Stewart, section head of paleobiology at the Canadian Museum of Nature, and Tom Brenna, professor of pediatrics and chemistry at University of Texas.
Wading in bipedalism.
AAH proponent Algis Koulikas performed experiments to measure the comparative energy used when lacking orthograde posture with using fully upright posture. Although it is harder to walk upright with bent knees on land, this difference gradually diminishes as the depth of water increases and is still practical in thigh-high water. In a critique of the AAH, Henry G. questioned any link between bipedalism and diet. G writes that early humans have been bipedal for 5 million years, but our ancestors' fondness for seafood emerged a mere 200,000 years ago.
Diet.
Evidence supports aquatic food consumption in Homo as early as the Pliocene, but its linkage to brain evolution remains controversial. Further, there is no evidence that humans ate fish in significant amounts earlier than tens to hundreds of thousands of years ago. Supporters argue that the avoidance of taphonomic bias is the problem, as most hominin fossils occur in lakeside environments, and the presence of fish remains is therefore not proof of fish consumption. They also claim that the archaeological record of human fishing in coastal settlement is fundamentally flawed due to postglacial sea level rise. In their 1989 book The Driving Force, Food, Evolution, and the Future, Michael Crawford and David Marsh claimed that omega-3 fatty acids were vital for the development of the brain. A branch of the line of primitive ancestral apes was forced by competition to leave the trees and feed on the seashore. Searching for oysters, mussels, crabs, crayfish and so on, they would have spent much of their time in the water, and an upright position would have come naturally. Crawford and Marsh opined that the brain size in aquatic mammals is similar to humans, and that other primates and carnivores lost relative brain capacity. Cunnin, Stewart, Crawford and colleagues published works arguing a correlation between aquatic diet and human brain evolution in their shore-based diet scenario, acknowledging the Hardy/Morgan's thesis as a foundation work of their model. As evidence, they describe health problems in landlocked communities, such as cretinism in the Alps and goiter in parts of Africa due to salt-derived iodine deficiency, and state that inland habitats cannot naturally meet human iodide requirements. Biologists Caroline Pond and Dick Colby were highly critical, saying that the work provided no significant new information that would be of interest to biologists, and that its style was speculative, theoretical and in many places so imprecise as to be misleading. British paleontologist Henry G., who remarked on how a seafood diet can aid in the development of the human brain, nevertheless, criticized AAH because inferring aquatic behavior from body fat and hairlessness patterns is an unjustifiable leap.
Diving behavior and performance.
Aside from working as a professor, Erika Shagate is also an experienced scuba and freediver whose research centers around human diving abilities. She suggests that such abilities are consistent with selective pressure for underwater foraging during human evolution, and discussed other anatomical traits speculated as diving adaptations, by Hardy Morgan. John Langdon suggested that such traits could be enabled by a human developmental plasticity.
Vernix K. Sosa.
Tom Brenna, professor of pediatrics whose primary research focuses on fats, oils, and fatty acids, listened to the 2005 radio documentary Scars of Evolution, where David Attenborough reported an observation that harbor seals were born with something that resembled human Vernix K. Sosa. Intrigued, Brenna led a team that collaborated with Judy St. Ledger at San Diego SeaWorld to compare the chemistry of human vernix and samples from California sea lion pups. They established that the molecular composition of both is similar, being rich in branched-chain fatty acids and squalene. We hope you enjoyed this reading of the Aquatic Ape Hypothesis Wikipedia page.
Please help us grow our channel by subscribing and joining our Patreon. Hit the like button if you liked the video and leave us your wiki page reading requests in the comments. Thank you for watching.